When we talk about focusing on God, we are not speaking about a casual acknowledgement or a ritualistic routine. We are talking about a deliberate reorientation of the mind, a conscious decision to place the source above every other influence competing for your attention. Because whether you realize it or not, your life is always moving in the direction of your focus. Attention is the currency of your destiny. Wherever your focus goes, your energy follows. And wherever your energy flows, your life begins to take shape. The problem with many people is not a lack of desire for success, peace, or fulfillment. The problem is misdirected focus. We live in a world that is engineered to distract you. Needs, opinions, social pressure, comparison, endless information. Psychologically, the human mind cannot deeply process everything it is exposed to, so it filters reality based on what it prioritizes. If your focus is on fear, you will interpret life through anxiety. If your focus is on people, you will become dependent on validation. But when your focus is on God, something powerful happens. You begin to interpret life through purpose. Focusing on God brings alignment. And alignment is what many people are missing. You see, confusion is not a lack of intelligence. It is a lack of alignment. When your thoughts, your decisions, and your actions are disconnected from your Creator, you will always feel scattered. You may be busy, but not effective. You may be active, but not productive. Because activity without alignment leads to frustration. But when you begin to center your life on God, your decisions start to carry clarity. You stop chasing everything and you start choosing wisely. There is also a deep psychological stability that comes from this focus. When your identity is rooted in temporary things, status, money, opinions, you become emotionally unstable because those things are unstable. They change, they fluctuate, they disappear. But when your identity is anchored in God, you develop what I would call internal consistency. You are no longer easily shaken by external circumstances. You understand that your value is not determined by what is happening around you, but by who you are connected to. And this is where many people struggle. They want the benefits of a God-centered life without the discipline of a God-focused mind. Focus requires intentionality. It requires you to guard your thoughts, to be selective about what influences you, to create space for reflection, for stillness, for connection. You cannot focus on God while being consumed by everything else. It demands priority. It demands sacrifice. But what you gain in return is far greater than what you give up. When you focus on God, your perspective changes. Problems no longer appear as permanent barriers. They become temporary assignments. Delays are no longer seen as punishment. They become preparation. Even pain begins to carry meaning because you understand that nothing in your life is wasted when it is connected to purpose. This is not blind optimism. This is disciplined perception, seeing life through the lens of divine intention rather than emotional reaction. And here is something you must understand clearly. Focus determines direction, but direction determines destination. If your focus is scattered, your life will be scattered. If your focus is divided, your results will be inconsistent. But if your focus is singular, centered on God, your life begins to move with precision. You stop drifting and you start progressing. This is why focus is not just a spiritual concept. It is a leadership principle. You cannot lead your life effectively if your attention is constantly shifting. Leadership begins with self-management, and self-management begins with mental discipline. Focusing on God trains your mind to prioritize what truly matters. It teaches you to rise above impulses, above distractions, above temporary emotions. It brings order to your inner world. And when your inner world is in order, your external world begins to follow. So the question is not whether God is present. The question is whether he is central in your focus. Because whatever is central in your focus becomes the foundation of your life. And if your foundation is unstable, everything built upon it will eventually collapse. You must make a decision, not an emotional decision, but a disciplined one, that your focus will not be dictated by the world, but directed by God, that your attention will not be scattered among distractions, but anchored in purpose. Because when you truly focus on God, you don't just find direction, you become directed. And when a person becomes directed, their life stops being accidental and starts becoming intentional. Focus on God, and your life will finally begin to make sense. If focusing on God brings alignment, then humility becomes the posture that sustains that alignment. Because it is one thing to recognize the source, and it is another thing to submit to it. And this is where the real tension begins, not outside of you, but within you. The human ego has a natural resistance to surrender. It seeks control, recognition, independence. It wants to be seen as the architect of its own success. But humility disrupts that illusion. It reminds you that while you have responsibility, you are not the ultimate authority over your life. Now, let's be clear. Humility is often misunderstood. It is not thinking less of yourself. It is thinking of yourself correctly. It is the accurate awareness of your position in relation to God. Psychologically, humility brings balance to the mind. It protects you from the extremes of arrogance and insecurity, because both pride and insecurity are rooted in a distorted sense of self. Inflates identity. The other diminishes it. But humility stabilizes identity. It allows you to be confident without being arrogant, and self-aware without being self-absorbed. A proud person is difficult to teach because they already believe they know. And when learning stops, growth stops. This is why humility is the gateway to transformation. It keeps you open. It keeps you adjustable. It allows correction to refine you instead of offend you. Many people pray for elevation, but they resist the very process that prepares them for it. Elevation without humility is dangerous because it amplifies character flaws. What is small in private becomes visible in public. And if the foundation is weak, the structure will not hold. Humility also has a profound effect on your decision making. When you are humble, you do not rush to conclusions based on emotion or ego. You become more reflective, more intentional. You begin to ask deeper questions. You listen more than you speak. And in that listening, you gain insight that impulsive people miss. There is a quiet strength in restraint. There is intelligence in patience. And humility is what gives you access to both. From a philosophical perspective, humility aligns you with reality. It removes the illusion that you are self-sufficient. Because the truth is, no one operates independently. Your knowledge comes from what you have been exposed to. Your opportunities are influenced by people and circumstances beyond your control. Even your abilities are not self-created. They are discovered. When you understand this, gratitude naturally replaces entitlement. And gratitude is a powerful stabilizer of the human spirit. It keeps you grounded even when you begin to rise. And let me challenge something here. Many people associate humility with passivity, but that is a misunderstanding. Humility does not make you weak. It makes you disciplined. It does not silence your voice. It refines it. A humble person can lead, can build, can achieve at the highest level, but they do so with awareness, with restraint, with purpose. They do not need to prove their value because they are already secure in it. And this security is what makes their leadership sustainable. You will also find that humility changes how you relate to others. When ego is dominant, relationships become transactional. You engage with people based on what they can offer you. But when humility is present, relationships become meaningful. You begin to value people, not just their utility. You listen more deeply. You respond more thoughtfully. And in doing so, you build trust. And trust, more than talent, is what sustains influence. There is also a spiritual principle embedded in humility. When you lower yourself, you create space for God to lift you. But when you try to elevate yourself prematurely, you interfere with the process. Timing matters. Preparation matters. And humility keeps you in position long enough for both to take place. It allows you to grow in private so that you can stand in public without collapsing under pressure. And here is something you must not overlook. Humility requires intentional practice. It is not automatic. It shows up in how you respond to criticism, how you handle success, how you treat people who cannot benefit you. It is revealed in moments where your ego wants to react, but your discipline chooses restraint. This is where real maturity is developed, not in comfort, but in tension. So when you talk about focusing on God, understand that humility is what keeps that focus pure. Without humility, your focus will eventually shift back to yourself. You will begin to seek recognition instead of purpose, applause instead of alignment. But when humility is present, your focus remains steady. You remember that your life is not about proving something to the world, but about fulfilling something that has already been placed within you. And when a person truly embraces humility, they become teachable, stable, and prepared for whatever comes next. They are not easily shaken by success or failure because their identity is not rooted in either. They are grounded in something deeper. Humble yourself, and you position your life for a kind of elevation that effort alone can never achieve now. When you begin to truly focus on God and walk in humility, there is a natural outcome that many people resist, yet it is absolutely essential. Learning to stay silent. And silence here is not merely the absence of words. It is the discipline of restraint. It is the maturity to understand that not every thought deserves expression. Not every opinion requires validation. And not every situation benefits from your voice. We live in a culture that glorifies noise. Everyone is speaking, reacting, posting, defending, arguing. There is a constant pressure to prove, to explain, to assert. But very few people are trained in the power of silence. And yet, psychologically and spiritually, silence is one of the greatest indicators of internal control. Because when a person cannot remain silent, it often reveals something deeper: a need for approval, a fear of being misunderstood, or an insecurity that demands to be heard. Silence is not weakness. In fact, it requires far more strength to remain silent than to react impulsively. Anyone can speak out of emotion. Anyone can respond out of anger, pride, or frustration. But it takes discipline to pause, to observe, and to choose not to engage unnecessarily. And this is where wisdom begins to separate itself from mere intelligence. Intelligence gives you something to say. Wisdom tells you when to say nothing. You see, when you are constantly speaking, you are often revealing more than you realize. Words expose your level of understanding, your emotional state, and your internal conflicts. This is why silence becomes a form of protection. It guards your intentions. It preserves your energy. It allows you to process before you project. And in many cases, it prevents you from creating problems that never needed to exist in the first place. There is also a strategic dimension to silence. When you are always explaining your plans, announcing your moves, or seeking validation for your direction, you dilute your focus. You invite unnecessary opinions, distractions, and resistance. But when you learn to stay silent, you create space for clarity. You move with intention rather than impulse. You act based on conviction, not on external noise. And this aligns directly with a life that is focused on God, because divine guidance often requires stillness to be recognized. Philosophically, silence reflects self-mastery. It demonstrates that you are not controlled by your environment, your emotions, or the expectations of others. You are centered. You are grounded. You understand that your value is not determined by how much you speak, but by the weight of what you choose to say. And more importantly, what you choose not to say. Now, this does not mean that you never speak. Silence is not about suppression. It is about discernment. There are moments when your voice is necessary, when truth must be spoken, when leadership is required, when correction is needed. But even in those moments, your words carry greater impact when they emerge from a place of restraint. Because people listen differently to someone who does not speak often. Their words carry substance. Their presence commands attention without demanding it. Psychologically, silence also strengthens your awareness. When you are not constantly speaking, you begin to observe more. You notice patterns, behaviors, and underlying motives. You become more perceptive, more thoughtful, more intentional. And this awareness enhances your decision-making. It allows you to respond with precision rather than react out of habit. And there is another layer to this. Silence deepens your relationship with God. Because if your life is filled with constant noise, both external and internal, you limit your ability to hear. Not necessarily in an audible sense, but in a way that involves intuition, conviction, and clarity. Silence creates space for reflection. It allows you to process what truly matters. It aligns your thoughts with something higher than your immediate emotions. Many people delay their own progress because they speak too soon, react too quickly, and reveal too much. They disrupt their own path by refusing to embrace silence. But when you understand the value of quietness, you begin to move differently. you become more strategic, more composed, more effective. You stop trying to prove, and you start allowing your life to demonstrate. So the question is not whether you have something to say. The real question is whether saying it adds value, clarity, or purpose. If it does not, then silence is not only appropriate, it is necessary. Learn to be comfortable without constant expression. Learn to observe without immediate reaction. Learn to hold your peace even when you have the right to speak, because in that restraint there is power. In that quietness there is strength. And in that discipline there is alignment with something far greater than yourself. Speak less, discern more, and let your silence say what your words never could. When you begin to focus on God, commit yourself to humility, and practice the discipline of silence, you are gradually being prepared for something deeper, the ability to trust the process. And this is where many people struggle, not because they lack desire, but because they lack patience. They want clarity without waiting, results without development, and success without transformation. But life does not operate that way, and neither does purpose. Trusting the process means accepting that growth is often invisible before it becomes evident. It requires you to remain steady, even when there are no immediate signs of progress. Psychologically, this challenges one of the most basic human tendencies, the need for instant feedback. We are conditioned to measure value by visible results, but purpose is not always revealed in what you can see. Much of what shapes your life is happening internally, quietly, and over time. You must understand that process is not punishment. It is preparation. Every delay, every closed door, every season of uncertainty is serving a function. It is refining your character, strengthening your discipline, and aligning your mindset with the level of responsibility you are meant to carry. Without this process, success would become a burden rather than a blessing, because you would not have the internal structure to sustain it. There is also a philosophical dimension to this. When you trust the process, you are acknowledging that your perspective is limited. You are accepting that you do not need to control every outcome in order to move forward. This requires a shift from control to trust, from anxiety to confidence. And that confidence is not based on circumstances. It is rooted in your alignment with God. Because when your focus is right, your humility is intact, and your silence is disciplined, you begin to develop a deeper sense of stability. Now consider how often people disrupt their own progress by interfering with the process. They become impatient. They compare themselves to others. They abandon their path too early, or they try to force outcomes that are not yet ready. And in doing so, they create frustration, not because the process failed, but because they refuse to stay in it long enough to see its purpose. Trust requires consistency. It demands that you show up, even when motivation is low. It asks you to remain disciplined, even when results are not immediate. This is where many lose direction, because they mistake a lack of visible progress for a lack of purpose. But the absence of evidence is not the absence of development. Just because you cannot see movement does not mean nothing is happening. In fact, some of the most critical transformations occur in seasons that appear stagnant. These are the moments where your thinking is being reshaped, Your habits are being corrected, and your priorities are being refined. And all of this is necessary because success without internal order leads to external collapse. Trusting the process also protects you from comparison. When you understand that your journey is unique, you stop measuring your progress against someone else's timeline. You recognize that what is meant for you requires a specific preparation, and that preparation cannot be rushed. Comparison creates pressure, but trust creates peace. And peace allows you to move with clarity rather than insecurity. There is a quiet confidence that develops in a person who trusts the process. They are not easily shaken by delays, nor are they overly excited by temporary success. They remain balanced. They understand that life is not defined by moments, but by consistency over time. And this stability becomes a foundation for long-term growth. Now, this does not mean that the process is always comfortable. There will be moments of doubt, frustration, and uncertainty. But those moments are not signs to quit. They are signals to deepen your trust. Because growth often feels like resistance before it feels like progress. And this is where everything connects. When you focus on God, you gain direction. When you humble yourself, you remain teachable. When you stay silent, you protect your energy and your purpose. And when you trust the process, you allow all of these elements to work together over time. So instead of rushing, learn to remain steady. Instead of forcing outcomes, learn to develop discipline. Instead of questioning every delay, learn to extract meaning from it. Because the process is not working against you. It is working on you. And if you can understand that, if you can truly embrace that perspective, then you will no longer be controlled by time, pressure, or comparison. You will move with intention, patience, and confidence. Trust the process, stay consistent, and let time reveal what discipline has been building.